Ilanjalian, Tamil Americans United Political Action Committee President and a Tamil community leader, to deliver her remarks.
Vanakkam, good morning, good evening to all our distinguished leaders, activists, and supporters. We remember the thousands of precious lives lost, innocent children, women, and men. Structural genocide was conducted on Tamils by the Sri Lankan government since independence in the form of laws, state-sponsored attacks, torture, and mass killings. The war ended in 2009, but the root cause of the war remains unresolved. The Tamil region is occupied and oppressed, and the singleization of Tamil land is currently taking place at an alarming rate. The Sri Lankan government received military help from other countries, promising that they would solve the Tamil issue by providing an equitable political solution after winning the war. However, they have gone back on their promises and have withdrawn from multiple UN resolutions on international investigation and accountability. The impunity nature of successive governments continues to date in Sri Lanka. Today, the entire island is going through a huge economic crisis. For the Sinhalese, it's about their daily life being affected, lack of fuel, cooking gas, and other commodities. The Tamils have seen a much, much bigger disaster. Lack of justice, freedom, and the right to live. The current situation is a cumulative result of Sinhala-only ideology, unresolved Tamil issue, widespread corruption, uncontrolled debt, and the sheer incompetency in managing the economy. The Tamils should not be paying for this crisis. IMF, World Bank, or any other country should be cautious in helping Sri Lanka and needs to realize the deceptive nature of the government, including its outstanding promises and commitments to the international community, the UN and the UNHRC. Any problem, whether big or small, can only be solved if the root cause of the issue is identified and fixed. Fixing the symptoms will not yield a long-term solution. At this juncture, we need an interim Tamil self-governing mechanism, an internationally monitored referendum for all the Tamils from the north and east, their descendants, and the Tamil diaspora who were forced to flee their homeland. War crimes and the genocide committed against the Tamil people by the Sinhala state must be investigated in the ICC. Demilitarization should happen in the north and eastern region. As we mourn for our losses, we also have hope and strength with our expanding ally in the US Congress, Tamil leaders and activists from our homeland, activists and supporters around the world. Together, we shall overcome. Nandri, thank you.
Thank you, Meena. Next, we have State Senator Jeff Jackson. He's a veteran, former Assistant District Attorney, and a member of the Army National Guard. Jeff Jackson is the Democratic Party candidate for U.S. Congress, North Carolina, District 14. Congratulations on your win yesterday. Here's Senator Jackson.
Well, that's very kind of you. Thank you. And thank you for having me. About 2 years ago, I knew very, very little about the genocide that occurred and about the history. And State Senator Wiley Nickel, who I believe is here tonight, came to my office and he asked me if I knew anything about the history. And I said very little. And so he taught me about it. He said, I think this is really important, and let's take a few minutes and let me teach you about this. And so we did. And then he said, there are some volunteers who are local, he said, in his district, who wanted to meet with me about this and teach me more and give me a personal perspective. And so I agreed and met with a number of you at that time. And it was absolutely crucial to forming my understanding of the events that took place the need for, as Representative Ross said, justice and accountability, and completely changed my thinking about this and informed my view of it in a way that brings me in complete agreement with everything that we heard from Representative Ross. So while State Senator Wiley Nickel sort of brought me to this issue, it's been Representative Ross's leadership that has really showed me what policy levers we need to move in order to address the reconciliation that needs to occur, the justice and accountability that needs to occur. I look to her for her leadership on this. And I want to thank all of you individually. You speak, each one of you, there are 100 people here? You speak, each one of you, on behalf of tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people. You have an opportunity, because of your good fortune in life, to have the ability and the wherewithal to engage directly with elected leaders. And you're doing that in a highly effective way. And I just want to tell you how much it means. There are very few people who can do what your volunteers have done as effectively as they've done it. You took someone who didn't know a lot about this and made that person an advocate along with all of you. It's a tremendous service that you do on behalf of your country. I think everything Representative Ross said with respect to the chaos in Sri Lanka right now is absolutely right. I think on the one hand, it is tragic. On the other hand, to her point, it's an opportunity to set things right, because clearly there are going to be some major changes coming, because there have to be, because of the level of dysfunction and chaos that exists. And making sure that justice and accountability get incorporated into those changes is crucial, and I think highly possible. So this is my long way of saying thank you to Wiley Nickel, thank you to Representative Ross, but more importantly, thank you to all of you for taking the time to volunteer and have these conversations. They've really made a difference for me. And I look forward to seeing you all again, and hopefully in person very soon. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Jackson. Next, we have State Senator Wiley Nickel. As you all know, Wiley is a long-term supporter of Tamil Americans and a champion of justice for Tamil genocide. Wiley Nickel is the Democratic Party candidate for U.S. Congress, North Carolina, District 13. Congrats to you two on your win last night. Here's Senator Nickel.
Thank you so much for having me here. It really is an honor to follow Congressman Deborah Ross, who is leading in the U.S. House of Representatives right now. Jeff Jackson is going to be a strong voice as well, and I'm very excited about his election results too, and his prospects to go to Washington and be a real voice for change. Vanakkam. Through the years, I've truly been honored to call so many in our Tamil American community of North Carolina dear and close friends. And I'm humbled to be asked here to speak on Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day and to join this community in this very sacred space as we honor the memory of the lives lost and recommit ourselves to the pursuit of justice. 13 years ago, the Tamil people of Sri Lanka were victims of genocide as the Sri Lankan government deliberately targeted Tamil civilian populations, resulting in the death of somewhere between 70,000 and 170,000 people in the final months of the war. I stand with you in recognizing the Tamil genocide, as together we are going to fight for genocide recognition here in the United States and internationally. Over successive Sri Lankan governments, there has been no meaningful accountability or justice for victims, and the Tamil community has continued to face discrimination and political oppression. For a peaceful future on the island of Sri Lanka, the demands of justice and accountability for the victims and survivors of Tamil genocide must be met. And for true peace, there must finally be a political solution that addresses the root cause of the armed conflict and meaningfully accounts for the demands of the Tamil people. A durable and sustainable political solution is the key to addressing longstanding tensions and advancing justice and human rights. That's why I'm honored to work with the Tamil American community as an advocate for accountability and a political solution for the Tamil people of Sri Lanka. Together, we have worked to educate other leaders like Jeff Jackson and the broader public on the plight of the Tamil people. And this is a fight that I hope to continue in Congress with the leaders we've just mentioned here and so many others. A commitment to human rights and freedom in Sri Lanka is not only critical for the future of the Tamil people, but for the future of the entire Pacific region. And the United States must be clear. Genocide cannot be committed with impunity. The international community must reaffirm its commitment to human rights in Sri Lanka through an international accountability mechanism. And the United States can and must be a leader in this. We cannot rest until the Tamil people receive true justice and accountability. On this Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day, I remain awed by the resilience of this community, and I mourn with you. And most importantly, I stand with you on this journey towards justice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Nicol. Next, I call upon Mr. Sridharan to share a few words with us. Mr. Sridharan is a long-serving parliamentarian who represents Tamil National Alliance Party. In addition, his family members are living witnesses of Tamil genocide. Mr. Sridharan, over to you.
Vanakkam, all of you. Thank you, Priya. Greetings to everyone who has joined this event. First, I would like to thank the organizers of this event for providing me the opportunity to share my views on this day of meditation, revival and commemoration. As we are observing the 13th Remembrance Day of Tamil people who were persecuted by the genocidal Sri Lankan terror state, I think it is important for all of us to understand what led the Elam Tamils in Sri Lanka to traverse through Mullivaikal in 2009 and why justice hasn't prevailed yet even after 30 years. By living in a world which claimed to value the basic human rights, in contrary, the genocidal Sri Lankan terror state has successfully vindicated itself so far from all crimes against humanity. Sri Lanka has been successful in deceiving the international community, the UN and the UNHRC. To keep the long story short, the mere reasons why the Tamils were faced to struggle for self-determination is the decision of the Sri Lankan state to embark on the impressive racist construct quoted with Sinhala Buddhist Savanist ideology since obtaining independence in 1948. The Elam Tamils being a nation with a sovereign kingdom and territorial recognition prior to the European invasion became the target of the Sinhalese in their post-independence goal of making the whole island as mono-Sinhalese Buddhist island. All efforts from the Tamils for survival were overpowered and crushed. From time to time. Several political pacts agreed between Sinhala and Tamil leaders were torn apart by the Sinhalese Buddhist monks and the main Sinhalese parties that were in opposition. Eventually, Tamil were pushed to take up weapons for survival, and the tragic episode ended in Mullivaikal in 2009, taking the lives of 100,046,679 Tamils based on available records. Thousands and thousands of Tamils lost their homes, livelihoods, got amputated, etc. The crimes of genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity were committed against the Tamil people by the Sinhalese Sri Lanka. Since 1948 to date, we have been subjected to ruthless and merciless genocide in our traditional homeland by the successive Sinhalese governments and their supporters. Amid all such monstrous oppressions, I proudly and confidently state that all these catastrophes unleashed on us Tamils have achieved nothing but made us stronger and more committed towards our Tamil national case in our Tamil traditional homeland. The bitter truth is that we Tamils as a nation have failed to ensure justice for the genocidal victims. We Tamils are struggling for our existence. International community so far has not realized the urgency in helping us. Today, it is proven beyond doubts that single Sri Lanka is failed state politically and economically. The current economic crisis is purely due to the Sri Lankan state oppressive racist policies. The Tamils are not responsible for the current independent Sri Lankan, and the Tamils must not suffer for the mistaken incompetency of Tamil Sinhalese Sri Lanka. Even in this predicament, the Sinhalese establishment is busy taking over Tamil's lands with the intent make the island mono Sinhalese Buddhist island. In this modern world, it is the responsibility of the international community, especially countries like the United States, to ensure justice for the international crimes and ensure non-recurrence of atrocity crimes. In this modern world order, such crimes should not be allowed, but more importantly, preventive measures must be put in the place. The Tamils are asking for justice and not recurrence. They are asking for their political rights. They just won't live peacefully in their homeland. I would like to request the government of the United States to fulfill the rights of Elam Tamils for life, liberty, and pursue the happiness, and the US takes tangible measures to ensure non-recurrence of the past international crimes on our people, and our people are given their inalienable rights to self-determination via a referendum to determine their political future. Only a referendum conducted by international community for the Elam Tamils to determine their political destiny and can bring permanent, sustainable, democratic, peaceful political solution that can serve the extent of the Tamils in the island. On behalf of the Elam Tamils, I call on the international community, especially the US, for the following three actions. First, a referendum for the Elam Tamils to determine their permanent political solution. Second, an interim governing mechanism for the Elam Tamils to govern and protect themselves and their lands until the referendum is held. Third, the referral of Sri Lanka to the International Criminal Court and to investigate all crimes, including genocide, war crimes, and crimes against humanity committed against the Tamil people by Sri Lanka. I would like to make the above as an appeal to the international community and am hopeful that our cry will be heard. Thank you very much. Nandri.
Thank you, Mr. Sridharan. Next, we have Ernest Rajakon, who is an active advocate for the Tamil people and a law student at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Last year, Ernest was honored as a member of Pittsburgh Magazine 40 Under 40. Here's Ernest to deliver his message.
Thank you. Good evening. I'm honored to be with you today on Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day, a difficult day for our people as we mark the anniversary of the Mullaivaikal massacre and remember the victims and the survivors. Today, we come together across the globe to grieve the people. We mourn together as a community for the lives that were taken. Today, Tamils gathered at Mullaivaikal, coming together to remember their loved ones. They gathered despite the fact that the Mullaivaikal memorialization site remains under heavy military surveillance and that Tamils engaging in remembrance activities have been subject to surveillance as well as police threats and harassment. It is imperative that members of the international community condemn this violation of the Tamil people's right to memorialization. Tellingly, despite an economic crisis crippling the country with massive shortages, the Sri Lankan government continues to spend significant resources repressing Tamil memorialization. Actions like these aren't unique to the current Rajapaksa government, but represent the Sinhala Buddhist nationalism animating successive Sri Lankan governments since independence. Sinhala Buddhist nationalist policies led not only to the discrimination and pogroms against Tamils that served as the root cause of the armed conflict, but also helped lead to the political and economic crises embroiling the nation today. Throughout the course of the conflict, the Sri Lankan government severely limited the freedom of the press and utilized abductions, torture, blatant targeting of civilian populations, and sexual violence as weapons of war. The current embattled president of Sri Lanka, Gotabaya Rajapaksa, served as Secretary of Defense in the final stages of the conflict in 2009, a time during which the Sri Lankan government committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide against the Tamil people. The international community's failure to protect the Tamil people during the height of the genocide, and subsequently to hold the Sri Lankan government accountable to its international commitments, has enabled the Sri Lankan government to delay and ultimately deny transitional justice processes. This lack of accountability allowed the brutality of the Sri Lankan state to flourish, such that its violence, which has always targeted Tamils on the island, has now been turned recently against Sinhalese protests in the south. Focusing on the current crises without addressing the root causes of the conflict or the long-standing grievances of Tamils will merely maintain the status quo and perpetuate cycles of violence, repression, and genocide. In response to the current political instability that grips Sri Lanka, the international community must emphasize the need for the Sri Lankan government to take meaningful steps towards justice and accountability, demilitarization, and a political solution that addresses the long-standing demands for self-determination by the Tamil people. The United States must play a leading role in ensuring Sri Lanka faces consequences through the renewal of the crucial OHCHR mandate at September UNHRC session and the use of bilateral levers, such as targeted sanctions, human rights conditionalities on trade, and immediate suspension of military partnerships. The United States must not only be a leader in the effort to address Tamil genocide through an international accountability mechanism, but formally recognize the Tamil genocide. Earlier today, the Canadian Parliament unanimously passed a motion recognizing May 18th as Tamil Genocide Remembrance Day. 13 years after the Mullainvizhal massacre, I look at the courage of the families of the disappeared, who have protested for years, demanding answers on their loved ones. Especially as I think about those who have passed, never knowing the fate of their loved ones, I urge us all to recognize that justice delayed is justice denied. True reform of the Sri Lankan state, the ability of Tamil people to live in their homeland with freedom and dignity, and a peaceful and prosperous future for all those on the island can only come through justice and accountability. Today, we remember the Tamil genocide. We mourn those lost 13 years ago and honor their memory. And in this time of collective grief, may we find strength in coming together in community and solidarity, and renewing our commitment to justice, self-determination, and a free and peaceful future for the Tamil people. Thank you.
Thank you, Ernest. Justice C.V. Vigneshwaran is the leader of the Tamil People's Alliance and a member of the Sri Lankan Parliament. He is the first Chief Minister of Tamil Majority Northern Province and is a former Supreme Court judge. Due to unforeseen reason, Justice Vigneshwaran is unable to join us live. However, he has sent us a video message, and here it is.
Vanakkam, everybody. This year is a special year of remembrance of the sad day in the year 2009, which marked the culmination of a vicious, merciless attack on hundreds of thousands of innocent Tamil civilians. It is perhaps poetic justice that those who were at the helm of that slaughter have been hounded out by those who cheered them on in ignorance at that time. There is a saying in Tamil that says, Arasan andrarupan, Teivam nindrarukum. The king punishes immediately, divinity abides its time to strike. This is perhaps divine retribution 13 years later. Perhaps the gods have had to step in since the machinery for the administration of justice has ground to a halt insofar as justice for Tamils was concerned. The Bible says you reap what you sow. The Sinhala villager has a pithy and trite saying as follows: Kala kala de, pala pala de. For all that people do, for sure, they would have their reciprocal fruition. I had referred to this Sinhala saying in Parliament in my maiden speech in August 2020 and even repeated it recently in Parliament. Those who committed hideous wrongs against innocent people are today suffering 13 years later in the same month in which those wrongs were then committed. Many Tamils who went through sufferings in the yesteryears have at some stage or other questioned the relevance of their sufferings and the wrongdoers going unpunished. Today, the Sri Lankan youth belonging to the majority community are teaching lessons to their own political leaders. What happened to Tamils in 1958, 1961, 74, 77, 81, and 83 are being reenacted. Only this time, the victims are the oppressors and suppressors of yesteryears. The Sinhalese are astounded at the brazen attack on peaceful protesters at Gaulface. Most are unaware of the attacks on Tamil Satyagrahis at the same venue long before the militant struggle began. Many of the Sinhalese today are cheering on the violent response to the thuggery unleashed by the government. Perhaps they would realize, indeed, they must realize, that the Tamils were a docile and peaceful people, and militancy was begotten by the repeated discrimination and violence unleashed on them by successive Sinhalese governments. Perhaps the ordinary Sinhalese will remember that the memorials erected in remembrance of their dear dead ones by our people in the north and east were broken and destroyed by the Rajapaksas and their ilk. Today, the statue of the late D.A. Rajapaksa, the father of Mahinda, Gotabaya and Basil, stands destroyed in the south. When British left us in the middle of the 20th century, they failed to ensure safety and fair play for the minorities in their erstwhile colony, Ceylon. Their unitary constitution gave way to a dictatorship of the majority within a democratic framework. From the time of independence, repression and discrimination against the Tamil-speaking people continued. If the Britishers had given us a confederal constitution, the minorities would have been able to retain their individuality and freedom, untrammeled by the dictatorial designs of the majority community. Today, the north and east are under military occupation. Since the end of the war, over a lakh of military men are continuously in occupation of our traditional homelands. They cultivate our lands and take profits from them. They run tourist hotels and earn income. They occupy our people's houses while the owners are living elsewhere at other people's mercy. They run business houses, restaurants, and shops competing with the locals. They obtain income from the Sinhalese fishermen brought by them from the south, who have taken over fishing rights from the locals, depriving them of their livelihood. They help the Buddhist priests from the south who are destroying Hindu temples in the north and east to replace them with Buddhist places of worship. And they are helping in the plundering of our resources by the southerners. Speaking of the plundering of our resources, the ilmenite deposits along the northeastern shore are fast disappearing. There are ilmenite deposits along the coastline of the northern and eastern provinces. There are 12 locations in Sri Lanka with ilmenite. Of these, only 3 are in the north and east. The remaining 9 sites are in the south. Hitherto, only our areas have been mined for ilmenite. The people of the locality are angry that when Sri Lanka has 12 potential sites for mining, it is the Tamil areas of the north and east that are mined, causing extensive devastation of the environment as pointed out by environmentalists. and it is a clear case of exploitation. Further, all income from the ilmenite deposits are taken by the central government, nothing to the province as such. Now, in the absence of the provincial councils, the continued exploitation of our shoreline is taking place with renewed energy. The areas in the south are safe from exploitation. Similarly, our granite, our minerals, our valuable forestries, and many other resources are being taken away by southerners with the active participation of the military. If the military were not around, our people would have stopped such daylight robbery of our assets and resources. The military seems to be stationed in the north and east in order to carry out their nefarious activities, not for security reasons. The government spends a substantial portion of its budget on defense and security. Perhaps today Sri Lanka will wake up to the fact that the priority in terms of expenditure is not those expenses necessary for regime security, such as military recruitments and military hardware, but national security in its truest sense, food security, environmental security, resource security, etc. Recently, it was reported that the Independence Day celebrations this year recorded the highest expenditure for the event in the last 5 years. By 4th February this year, Sri Lanka was staring at bankruptcy and yet felt the need to waste money on extravagance. Profligacy in the face of bankruptcy, corruption even when the kickbacks were from borrowed money, ruled the roost as it were. Let me elaborate on a few. How could the Rajapaksas have given recognition to the Karunas and the Pilayans, to the KPs and others who were earlier with the LTT, without receiving ample benefits from them to spare their lives? Now the Sinhalese youth are asking as to what happened to the gold the government captured from the tigers. The extent to which the powers that be in Sri Lanka have plundered the assets of the country shows that the war was a business for them. The poor Tamils and Muslims became the scapegoats for their genocidal activities. The main reason why Sri Lanka is today facing its economic impasse is due to the maintenance of a large force of military far in excess of its needs and the haphazard borrowing of large loans from various sources, including China, to prosecute the war, which have now accumulated to $52 billion. No proper assessment has been done to check on the suitability and the propriety of purchasing many armaments for the forces. Under the pretext of state secrets, any questioning with regard to their actual needs have been suppressed. They may have been purchased for collateral benefits. Mega building projects constructed under Rajapaksa presidency with Chinese loans by Chinese companies continue to incur huge losses to the Sri Lankan government. Sri Lanka's Hambantota Port, Mattala Airport, Magam Ruhunapura International Conference Hall, MRICH, and the Hambantota International Cricket Stadium, built at great cost, are all white elephants today. Sri Lanka's economic mess today is directly attributable to the Rajapaksas. What should we Tamils do at this juncture? What should our goals be? Let me leave you with a few thoughts, bearing in mind that the Tamils who have been blighted by war, bullied by occupying forces, buffeted by the present economic crisis are the most vulnerable in this island. Firstly, as an immediate measure, steps should be taken to ensure the food security of the Tamils, particularly the female-headed households and other vulnerable groups. We have been taking steps to help persons cultivate certain vegetables and other crops and have established nurseries. This project has to be expanded to a larger scale to cover as many people as possible because availability of good variety of vegetable seeds would promote home gardening in a big way. 2, microfinance has to be revived. Assistance must be rendered to ensure that people could survive the next 1 to 2 years. 3, ensure that medicines are available in the north and east at least. I recommend discussing with the health officials in charge of the area and making available the required medicines based on need. Channeling these medicines through the central government will result in the medicines being siphoned out. Maybe we could get the help of our alternate medicine doctors to treat appropriate diseases too. Fourthly, providing necessary assistance to our farmers and fishermen to ensure that their produce is not affected due to the long power shortages. We need to popularize alternate sources of energy such as solar energy, windmill energy, etc. to ease the energy crisis. Fifth one, instituting legal action against illegal fishing and encroachment by fishermen from the south. Our fishermen need assistance with their nets and boats. Sixthly, providing scholarship to our students with conditions on repayment to the community after graduation. The education-focused culture of the Tamils has finally succumbed to the repeated attacks on it from standardization to marginalization. It is imperative that our educational culture is revived through well-publicized scholarships at different age groups. Seventhly, the military must be withdrawn from the north and east, and Tamil-speaking police must be asked to take over security now. It is essential that we maintain pressure on this front to allow our people the basic freedoms of movement and association. Sri Lanka was supposed to inform the UN of the areas occupied by the military and indicate the purposes
Recording in progress.
Have compassion, stay and watch.
ஆகவே தயவு செய்து இவர்களை இங்கே இந்த துன்பங்களை தீர்க்கிறதுக்கு மிகவும் பணிவாக நாங்கள் கேட்டுக்கொள்கிறோம்.
This Brahmin who was talking to me, he just really laid it on the line that we don't care about our shelter and food and water. We'll take care of ourselves. We just need international eyes on the ground to see what's happening here.
ஆகவே தம்பி கேளும். ஆகவே இவையில் இங்கே இருந்து போறதுக்கு நாங்கள் அனுமதித்தால் உண்மையும்படி இந்த ஒட்டுமொத்த மக்கள் அத்தனை பேரும் மரணிக்க வேண்டிய ஒரு சூழ்நிலை களத்துக்கு கிட்ட வந்து நிக்குது எங்களுக்கு.
Those pleas fell on deaf ears at the UN.
Our official response was that we accepted the government's suggestion that they could no longer guarantee our safety.
What did you personally think?
I personally thought that it was a mistake.
For me, that was personally the worst moment of my life. It seemed like it was their greatest hour of need, where you had an army sitting on the doorstep wanting to take the town, and we drove out. That was a very, very difficult experience for us, and a real sense of abandonment of these people.
As the UN report now acknowledges, the removal of their staff left virtually no international witnesses in the area, which meant the path was open for government forces to launch a final offensive into the tiger-held areas. This was an unequal war. The Sri Lankan government had the tacit support of most of the world's powers and was equipped with heavy artillery from China and elsewhere. It also had a fleet of Israeli Kafir combat aircraft. This footage of a typical raid comes from the government. But on the ground, the Tamils were filming too. We don't know who shot this. It may have been a tiger cameraman, or it may have been a civilian. Whoever it was, they clearly thought it important to keep a record. The Sri Lankan government announced the creation of what they called a no-fire zone. This, they claimed, was part of an official government policy of 0 civilian casualties. Among the thousands who flocked here, encouraged by that promise, were doctors, nurses, patients whose hospitals had been destroyed in the fighting. Just inside the no-fire zone, they set up this emergency hospital. A makeshift arrangement of beds and mattresses in an abandoned primary school. It was clearly marked with red crosses on the roof, which gave it protection under international law.
It's quite simple. You can't attack a hospital. The only exception would be if there was some evidence that the hospital was actually being used for military purposes. Otherwise, it's very clear a hospital is totally off limits. It's not a military objective. How could it be attacked?
But government forces did attack it. One man who arrived immediately afterwards found a scene of horror. And so, Vani Kumar herself, here in the pink dress, began working as a volunteer. As a biomedical technician in London, she had never dealt directly with a patient. But now she found herself helping in surgical operations with the man running the hospital, Dr. Samaraja.
He's a great person. He's an example of how a doctor should be. I never saw him arrested or even went into a bunker to save himself.
But the conditions they all worked under were terrible.
One of the staff came in and was actually taking the blood into a bottle, like the blood from waste blood from the wound. And then she was like filtering it with a white piece of cloth and then re-entering it into the patient.
One day, the hospital was visited by somebody from the Red Cross, the ICRC.
A foreigner came to visit the hospital. He had a GPS and he was going through everywhere with Dr. Sanmaraja was taking him everywhere, showing him where the patients were and everything.
The standard practice of the International Red Cross throughout the world in battlefield situations like this is that they provide the coordinates of medical facilities which are protected under international humanitarian law to the opposing parties so that both can avoid attacking these spaces.
And then after he left about half an hour to 1 hour sort of, shell bomb right into the ward. I just saw like the pieces of dead bodies stuck into walls, and it was completely destroyed. And there were only few people we were able to save from that shell bomb.
So you think this was deliberate?
Yeah, I think they deliberately just wanted to. It was targeted, though. The shell bomb was targeted to the hospital.
Eventually, the attacks on these medical spaces seemed to be so consistent that the Tamil government doctors requested the ICRC to stop providing the coordinates to the government. By May 2009, there had been roughly 65 attacks on these medical points that were treating civilians.
That's evidence of a war crime.
Well, yes, it probably constitutes a war crime.
Pleased to tell you today that all of the civilians who were inside the no-fire zone have now been rescued by government forces.
That statement, it is now clear, could not have been further from the truth. The United Nations panel has now concluded that as many as 40,000 people died in the final few weeks of the war. Other sources say the figure may have been even greater. As thousands of terrified survivors struggled to escape the slaughter at the end of Sri Lanka's civil war in May 2009, triumphant government forces made sure no international observers were allowed anywhere near. The reason is now clear. Whilst the world was shown these official images of government forces meeting triumphantly on the beach, other members of those same forces were committing a series of horrific war crimes. The reason we know about these crimes is that some of them were recorded on mobile phones as grotesque war trophies. The images which follow, showing the execution of bound prisoners and the aftermath of what appears to be systematic sexual abuse and murder, are extremely distressing. But we believe it is important that they are made public. They represent powerful evidence of war crimes which demand proper investigation. Yet more of his evidence relates to these two men. In the last few days of the war, Balasingham Nadesan and Sivaratnam Pulladevan, both senior civilian members of the Tiger leadership, told the UN and several foreign governments that they were prepared to surrender unconditionally. The UN report has confirmed that this offer was conveyed directly to and accepted by President Rajapaksa and his political advisor, his brother Basil. And so, on the 18th of May, carrying a white flag, Nadesan and Pulladevan surrendered. But among the photographs from our source in Sri Lanka are these. They have been positively identified as the bodies of Nadesan and Pulladevan. These are men who, all the evidence suggests, made a genuine attempt to surrender, having been told the president himself had accepted their offer. We had these and other photographs analyzed by a forensic pathologist. Of these, he said,
"There is a very high incidence of lethal gunshot wounds to the head, raising the strong suspicion of executions at the time of surrender, with aimed headshots to stationary, highly visible targets."
And these pictures he described as
compelling evidence of systematic executions and likely sexual assault of female prisoners prior to execution.
Just 5 days after the end of the war, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon flew over